Hello, and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We're going to continue today with the disordered thought problems that people have when they think about themselves in a way that's negative and not good. And I'm not one of these people that pictures everything is great, everything is wonderful, search for the good, and grab onto all the wonderful things that are happening around you and be positive and never be negative. Negative things do happen to us, and we have to handle them. But positive things happen to us too. And we have a way that we develop in terms of thinking about ourselves. And I need to warn you, and this is what this is about, this next one that I'm dealing with. It's called emotional reasoning. When you believe your emotions about yourself rather than what the truth is. Now, I think this is a rather common one. Somebody makes a mistake. That means their whole life is colored by that mistake, and they start to think of themselves in terms of their mistake. You know, we are emotional people. We are actually more emotional than we are intellectual. We think of ourselves as being intellectual. We solve problems. We reason things out. But there's a whole emotional component to our lives that we rely upon those emotions. We think of ourselves in terms of those emotions. And then what we start to think about ourselves emotionally tinges what we think about ourselves, period. And we start to believe what our emotions are telling us. So if my emotions tells me that I have a learning disability, so therefore I can't go to college, I'm making this up in my head, of course, as I'm going along here, and I start to believe that, then I'm going to say, no, I can't go up for college. No, I can't apply to nursing school. No, I can't go to a business college. I don't have it within me to do that. And you start to believe it. And when you start to believe negative about yourself, then what you're doing is you're losing your balance. I'm not saying that you have to think constant positives, because there are negatives in our lives. I think we need to be realistic about it. But at the same time, we can get so negative in our thinking that anything that's positive just doesn't have a place. Well, I've known people, females, whose dads have told them, you better marry so-and-so because you'll never get a better offer. Like they aren't deserving of a, quote, better offer. Whatever that happens to mean. You know, it means different things to different people. But when I work with people, ultimately, I have to work with their self-concept. And if their self-concept is negative and they really believe it, you cannot really argue a person into feeling good about themselves. Arguing does not make a difference with them. They only turn around and say, yeah, well, that's your opinion, but it's not my opinion, and they're going to revert back to their opinion. So how do you get them out of it? I think there are things that they can do, things that you teach them to do, in which they learn the fact that, oh, I did okay here. Maybe I can do this after all. Let's try it. And if I don't succeed, it's not the end of the world. If I do succeed, I'll go further with it. This is the way a lot of students declare their majors in college. Well, I'd like to be a doctor, but I can't do math. Or I'd love to be a doctor, but I can't do chemistry. Let's try a beginning chemistry class and see how you do. If you do fine with that, take it further. And so therefore it's like an experimental thing that you're on, kind of research oriented as to who you are and what you can do. And when you find out what you can do and that you are a lot better than you think you are, then absorb it, rejoice in it. Don't become arrogant about it, but if you can do things that you didn't know you could do and you're learning more and more about yourself, well, this is what aptitude tests are supposed to study. You take an aptitude test. Well, am I good at this or am I good at that? But I think in life we're not taking aptitude tests only if we're in school, so you try something and it works. Wow, that's great. Let me take it a step further. And pretty soon you've gotten pretty high up the ladder in terms of what you can do. And that changes your orientation about yourself. I'm not a positive a positive attitude type person in which you constantly have to believe positives all the time, because I'm a realist. I think that you should believe positives where they exist. You should accept deficiencies or problems that you have as a reality of life, but not to demean yourself. Not everybody is perfect in everything. You know what's good for you, and you try it out, and it works. You do a little more, it still works. You do a little more, it still works. And then you can gradually change a negative self-concept into a positive one. Not by just reading and harping on it, but the fact is you have to get started thinking that people have worth, they have innate worth. Everybody has some kinds of gifts that they can use. Everybody can help people in some kind of way. Everybody has something they can give to society and other people, which is important. Rather than sit there and say, I can't, I can't, I can't, well, let's see that you can. You won't be able to do everything, but I can't do everything. The person down my street can't do everything, but there will be a range of things that you can do that is going to be good, that's going to give you joy, that's going to give you peace, that's going to increase your self-concept and what you can do, and you need to focus on that. So the emotional reasoning is you have to negate that idea that if you feel bad, you are bad. You have to get rid of the idea that if you feel guilty, you must have done something wrong. Maybe you didn't do anything wrong. Or if you feel overwhelmed, then you feel worthless. I'm overwhelmed all the time. I feel worthless. You know, that's not the case. You feel overwhelmed because you may have too much to do. But that's a human thing. You're a human being. You have the right to be a human being. And because you have the right to be a human being, God expects you to be a human being. He doesn't expect that you're going to be perfect. But He does expect you to do the best that you can. So if you feel negative, then you assume that you are negative. And you can't always trust your emotions. Just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean life is a certain way. There is a statement. You can act your way into feeling, but you can't feel your way into acting. What does that mean? Well, you feel insecure. So you act as if you're secure. You don't act as if you're insecure. And gradually your feelings catch up with what you're doing, and they start to match up, and you feel pretty good. If you wait until you feel better before you act like you're feeling better, that may not come, because you can't feel your way into acting. That's what that statement means. You may need to feel like you're in charge of something. You may need to feel that you're a good speaker. Supposing you're giving a speech in front of a group and you're terrified. You don't go up and be terrified. I mean, you may feel that way inwardly, but you act as if you're not terrified. You've done a lot of preparation, and you just go with what you've learned and go with your gut, so to speak, and you act very normal, and you act very charming, and you act very knowledgeable, and pretty soon you're going to start feeling like that, and you're going to realize that your process of thought has changed from being negative, I'm not very good at this, I know I'll fail, to being, I was okay with this, I did all right, I must be all right. We tend to define ourselves in terms of our emotions, but the problem is our emotions aren't always accurate. If the world is falling apart, and that's what you truly believe, that the world is falling apart and I can't get a job and this and that and the other, and I know those are all serious things and we have to take them seriously, but that can color your whole attitude about yourself. If you think, you know, I'm a good worker, yes, it is hard to get a job today, and I don't believe for 1 minute our economy is as good as what people think it is, or what people talk about. You know, I have a person, a family member who's a really good worker, but he has to change jobs every so often because the company believes they can report to the government that they're hiring every month. Well, how do they hire every month? See how good our economy is. See how good our business are. Our business is so good that we're hiring every month. But when they get a new worker, a lot of times they only let them work about 10 months and they let them go. They don't even let them work a full year. And it's not because there's anything wrong with their work. They have to let people go so they can hire more, so they can report to the government that they're hiring every month. So when people say the unemployment rate is down, maybe it is. And if the economy seems to be better, maybe it is for some people, but it's not for all people. I'm still hearing about plant closings, about plants moving to different states, about 800 here and 1,400 there losing their jobs, you know. And a lot of it before Christmas time or before other, and this is not a Christmas show by any means, but you hear of it all the time. So if you hear of it all the time, what makes the economy so good? Obviously, something's being skewed. That's my position, but it may not be yours, and that's fine. I'm not trying to get you to agree with me on anything, but myself, I don't think the economy, excuse me, is as good as what some people say it is. But that's just my position. So you can't always trust your emotions. If you have a bad day, you can't assume that your whole life is bad or going to be, you know. I know many college professors because I was one, and I still teach today, and a lot of them get really lonely on weekends, so they think that teaching is a very lonely job, because if they're single and they don't have a family, then if they're teaching, they're busy for the teaching day for 5 days a week, and then after that, they're kind of sitting around and not getting much out of life for the weekend. So you have to engage yourself. You have to find things that work for you. Do not necessarily trust your emotions as being true. You evaluate them. You give them validation. You always need to validate your emotions. Today I'm feeling badly. Today I'm feeling depressed. Today I'm joyous. But you don't define your being and your self-worth in terms of your emotions. You validate the emotions for what they are, but that doesn't mean you sink into them and they are the permanent truth about you, because they're just a part of your existence. They're not your basic character. They're what you are experiencing, but they're not your basic character. And I think this is an important thing that we're discussing, and I know I'm spending a lot of time with this here, but it's important, because you don't want to start thinking, this is a good day, I feel good. Okay, I'm a good person and I'm successful. And then the next day, you don't feel good, and maybe something happens that isn't so beneficial for you. And then you say, no, I'm not so good. This wasn't a good day. And you define yourself and your personhood on the basis of the emotions that you're experiencing, which last only for a short period of time, and then they shift. The body was not made to endure emotions for an eternity. If you feel badly, your body was not made to feel badly for the rest of your life, or for the rest of the week, or even for the rest of the day. You shift. You go from one to another. You shift up and down. We are a people that are not so stable that we don't have shifts in what we're dealing with. Shifts in our emotions. It doesn't mean they have to be a great shift, but there are good days, and then there are days that aren't so good. That does not define who you are. Who you are is defined by a character, what you believe in, what your personality is really like, and what you think on a momentary basis or a short-term basis is not your character. It's just an emotion that you happen to be feeling for the moment. So do not judge yourself by the emotions of the moment, because the emotions of the moment may not be exactly where you are in an intellectual sense or in a personal sense. But you do go through those things, and you have to remember this is temporary. You'll get out of it. I've worked with a lot of depressed people in my professional life, and what I always tell them is that this is not permanent. If you're depressed now, then give it some time. You're going to start to lift. And when you start to lift, everything that you are bothered about lifts with you, and then you're fine. Now, it's more extreme if you have a bipolar disorder, or if you have a disorder where you are cycling a lot, but the emotions themselves still don't define who you are. They define what you're feeling with in the moment, what you're feeling about in the moment, but it doesn't define you as a person. So just don't get hung up with that, and don't believe your emotions are you. Only a part of you, but not the total you. Okay, now, the next one would be should statements. We motivate ourselves by telling ourselves things like, for example, we're giving ourselves orders. I should do this. I must do that. And what you do is you put these thoughts on yourself, and you put these thoughts on other people as well. So you end up by judging yourself harshly, and you end up by judging other people as well. He should have done that. She should have done that. They shouldn't have done this. They should have done something else instead. Or you turn it in onto yourself. I should have been better. I should have been able to make better decisions. I should have been more forthright. And you start to judge yourself. Now, some of it may be true. Maybe somebody should have done something different. Maybe you should have done something different. But at the same time, there is such a thing as forgiveness, and you have to forgive yourself, and you have to forgive other people. And I want to talk a little bit about what happens to you when you start thinking negatively about yourself because you're not living up to what your should statements are. It makes you bitter. After a while, it makes you bitter. You motivate yourself by telling you, I should, I must, I will. And then if sometimes you can't manage it, for some reason it just doesn't work out, then what's going to happen is that you become bitter. You can become bitter at other people. Well, this wouldn't have happened to me if they had done that. Now, the two cases, two situations that I see this as being particularly a problem, and one of the cases is the fact of people who are suffering abuse. They think if I was only stronger, I would stop it. I should have stopped it. I didn't stop it. Well, abuse is a power struggle, and the person who is abusing you is seeking out power against you, and you may not have the ability to stop that. So as I tell people, especially when it comes to children and adults, children, even grown children, they were abused as children. Why didn't I stop it? Well, you couldn't. If you were younger or you didn't have the skills to stop it, or the person who was abusing you is much bigger, much stronger, more intimidating, more frightening, then don't blame yourself that you couldn't have stopped it. A lot of people cannot stop abuse because the abuser is so powerful and so intimidating, and that's what they seek. They seek power. They want power. And if they have it, then they take power and they can become abusive. It is not your fault if somebody is abusing you. It is not your fault if somebody becomes abusive. You did not cause it, and you do not need to take any blame or any guilt. And then you have to admit also that in life there are adults who abuse other adults in an intimidating manner. I'm your boss, you got to do what I say, and if you don't do what I say, then that's awful, and then you're a bad person. So here again, you have to understand the should statements can be negative. In an ideal world, maybe you could answer all your own should statements, but you can't always do that. So the next one that I want to do is labeling and mislabeling. You create a negative image of yourself by labeling yourself mean or bad if you make a mistake. You label yourself. You put a label on you. Now, sometimes it's helpful to be able to label something. If I have a person that I'm treating and they have a mental illness, if they can put a label on it, sometimes it kind of encapsulates it and it makes it more understandable and they can deal with it better. But in everyday life, to label yourself as bad or good, in that case, you're probably mislabeling yourself. And as a result of that, you are suffering. It causes hostility, it causes bitterness, and it focuses on your weaknesses instead of your positive points. You make a mistake, you're bad. You on a diet, but you ate too much, you're bad. This labeling yourself as bad because you made a mistake, and it may not even have been a mistake, that's something that you have to be careful about. And the last one here is personalization. When you assume responsibility for a negative thing, even if you don't have the reason to do so. I assume responsibility because somebody abused me, even though I haven't had any reason to blame myself because I couldn't avoid it, or something like that. You're going to find that a lot of these things blend together, but you conclude that something is your own fault, even if you're not responsible. Well, if I'd only been here when my father died, maybe I could have saved him. But you had no knowledge that your father was going to die. He was fine when you left him. And that happened to one of my family members who was a nurse. Maybe if I'd stayed longer, I could have seen him have a heart attack and I could have stopped it. I could have done something for him. But if there's no sign of trouble, you go off and do your normal things. You come back and you find that something has happened that's bad. That's not necessarily your fault. It really isn't your fault. So a child brings home a note from the school, and the note says to the mother that the child is not doing well. The mother automatically assumes it's her fault. She's a bad mother. She should be teaching the child, or she should be reinforcing what the teacher wants him to learn at home. And they go through all of this stuff, and it's all negative, negative, negative. And it does not help you at all in order to be able to live a good life. You are not going to be perfect. You're going to make some mistakes, but some of the mistakes that you blame yourself for are not mistakes at all. It's just a product of human life. And when you think that you're bad, think it through. It may have nothing to do with you. So you buy a house, and it turns out, or you're renting a house, and it turns out that the person who owns the house that you're renting is not paying their mortgage, and so therefore you become evicted. This happens more commonly than you think. An apartment building, you're renting your apartment, you're paying your rent, but maybe the person who owns the apartment building isn't paying the mortgage on that apartment. Everyone gets evicted, and it's not your fault. You paid your rent. You should be able to stay there. So what do you think? Well, if I'd only picked another place to live, I had some questions about it, but I took it anyway. I was in a bind. It was the first thing that came up, and I had to have a place right away, so I did it. And in every little way you try to blame yourself, if only I had lived somewhere else. If only I had gone somewhere else. If only I had took another job, if this job didn't work out. And in any way you can, you start to mislabel yourself, and you start to personalize a problem as being your problem when it wasn't your problem to begin with. So the thought disorders, and now we've covered all of them. I can go on to something else next time. But the thought disorders change who you are, because you define yourself in terms of how you're thinking. The defense mechanisms talk about how you handle stress, but the thought disorders define who you are. In a sense, defense mechanisms do too, but not as clearly and not as strongly. When you have a thought problem and you are thinking negatively and you're blaming yourself and you're focusing on the negative, you start to believe that negative, which is what I say, you are what you think you are. You are what the emotions say you are in your own mind, but that may not be accurate. You can change, and you can change your thinking process and come through this with a much better attitude and a much happier life. Now, we are getting out of time, so I'm going to close it here. We have now finished it, and we'll be moving on to something else next time. So please join me then.